Imagine you're rushing through the bustling halls of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, heart pounding, desperate not to miss your flight. You see a commotion at the gate. A stern-faced police officer is blocking a black woman from boarding, dismissing her ticket, yelling loud enough for everyone to freeze. Why is this happening? Stay tuned to find out, on Adam Alpha. Before you can process what's happening, the woman quietly stands her ground, calm but insistent. Little does anyone know, least of all that abrasive officer, that beneath her understated appearance lies a powerful secret. She is the CEO of the very airline he's treating her unworthy to board. Can you guess what happens next? Keep watching, on Adam Alpha, to witness a shocking revelation. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was alive with its usual morning frenzy. Car tires screeched at the curb as drivers hastily offloaded luggage. Bleary-eyed passengers navigated check-in counters, and announcements echoed from overhead speakers. The hum of voices intermingled with the occasional roar of planes taking off in the distance. As the first rays of sunlight flooded through the vast glass windows, the airport's energy felt electric. People were either lost in thought or immersed in conversation, each carrying their unique hopes and anxieties for the journey ahead. In the center of this tapestry of movement and anticipation stood Officer Donovan Meyers, a man who prided himself on maintaining order. At 6 feet 2 inches, with a muscular build, pressed uniform, and a razor-sharp glare, Donovan looked every bit the picture of a vigilant airport cop. He had served in this post for over a decade, ushered in countless travelers, arrested pickpockets, and broken up minor brawls. While he was undeniably effective at his job, there was an undercurrent to his behavior that had often gone unspoken, except among those who had felt the sting of it personally. He was quick to judge people based on their ethnicity, attire, or accent. Far too often, Donovan's version of maintaining order bled into biased assumptions and prejudiced remarks. That morning, Donovan was on heightened alert. A tip had come in about possible contraband or suspicious activity. Details were vague, but it put him on edge. He roamed the terminals with a cautious eye, scanning faces, double-checking tickets, stepping in wherever he sensed even a whiff of trouble. Unfortunately, Donovan's sense of trouble was heavily influenced by stereotypes. People of color, in his eyes, often warranted more scrutiny. Inside Terminal B, lines at the security checkpoint stretched longer than usual. Passengers shuffled forward, pulling out IDs, untying and readying shoes. Here, among the crowd, was a dignified black woman in her mid-40s. Her name was Meredith Cole, though no one in that line recognized the name. She wore simple black slacks, a pastel blouse, and a light jacket that bore no corporate logo or sign of status. Her short, natural curls framed a face that was serene but watchful, as if she was quietly taking in the world around her. By all appearances, she was an unremarkable traveler, just another person trying not to miss her flight. Nobody, least of all Donovan, had any idea that Meredith was actually the CEO of Skyway Connect, a high-profile regional airline that collaborated with multiple major carriers nationwide. She had started undercover inspections a few months ago to investigate the quality of her airline's customer service firsthand. A series of recent complaints about ground staff treatment had caught her attention. She wanted to see what passengers really experienced and how the employees, ranging from flight attendants to gate agents, responded to unexpected challenges. So, she traveled incognito, booking her flights under a different name, dressing in an unassuming manner, and conversing with crew as though she were just another passenger. Meredith advanced in the security line. An elderly man in front of her struggled to untie his shoes. She gently leaned down to help him, offering a kind smile. The man thanked her, a mixture of gratitude and relief evident in his eyes. It was a small gesture, but it was indicative of Meredith's personality, patient, empathetic, unpretentious. But it was exactly then that Officer Donovan Meyers, patrolling nearby, caught sight of her. She was leaning near another passenger's feet, and for the briefest moment, her gesture of assistance somehow drew Donovan's suspicion. Who was this woman? Was she hiding something? That was often how his mind worked. The simplest act could trigger an avalanche of doubts if the person involved didn't look right to him. He gripped the radio at his shoulder, feeling a rush of self-righteous adrenaline. He decided to keep an eye on this woman. If something was amiss, he'd be the one to catch it. Little did he know, the ripple effect this moment would trigger a confrontation that would soon shake the entire airport terminal. But for now, Meredith proceeded calmly, unaware that a storm was gathering just beyond her line of vision. By the time Meredith reached her gate, Gate B23, the overhead announcement declared that boarding for Skyway Connect Flight 3045 to Chicago O'Hare would begin shortly. She felt a small twinge of pride hearing the flight number. Even though she was traveling incognito, she had helped plan that flight schedule, worked on the partnership with major carriers, and had spent countless late nights ensuring the route was profitable and efficiently staffed. Today, she would board just like any regular customer to see whether recent complaints about staff rudeness held any truth. The gate area was packed with fellow travelers. A weary mother tried to pacify a squirming toddler. A business traveler tapped away on his laptop. A few families chatted in excited tones about their upcoming trip. Meredith located a seat near the large windows, her carry-on neatly placed by her feet. She watched the planes outside, silhouettes of aircraft taking off into the clear blue sky. It reminded her of why she loved the industry. It connected people, made distances feel shorter, and turned the world into a more accessible place. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the gate's intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the pre-boarding announcement for Flight 3045 to Chicago O'Hare. We'll begin boarding shortly with our passengers needing special assistance." The gate agent, Stephanie Brooks, looked tired but tried to keep her voice upbeat. She repeated the instructions about checking in large carry-ons, seat upgrades, and frequent flyer perks. Meredith noted everything carefully, gauging the agent's tone, eye contact, and courtesy. So far, so good. Stephanie seemed overworked but still maintaining a professional demeanor. However, as soon as boarding began, Meredith noticed an irregularity. An older couple had apparently paid for priority boarding, but the couple complained that their request wasn't reflected on their boarding passes. Stephanie apologized politely, fidgeting at her computer. She seemed stressed. "I'm sorry for the confusion," she said, scanning their passes. After a few keystrokes, she nodded. "Yes, it looks like the system didn't capture your pre-boarding status. Let me fix it." She handed them new passes, smiling. "Enjoy your flight." The couple seemed relieved. Meredith made a mental note. The glitch indicated that somewhere in the system, the upgrades weren't being properly recorded. She'd have to look into that. But that's exactly what she was here for, to observe such hiccups and address them in the boardroom. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice Officer Donovan Meyers stepping into the gate area, scanning the crowd. Donovan's predatory gaze lingered on Meredith. Something about her composed demeanor, the way she had helped that elderly man earlier, rankled him. He saw her quiet confidence as suspicious, especially because he'd convinced himself from a distance that she was up to something. People who were nervous always gave themselves away, but in Donovan's mind, people who appeared too calm could be hiding something even bigger. He discreetly approached the gate podium. "Morning, miss," he said, tipping his hat at Stephanie. She paused mid-boarding announcement, startled by his approach. "Everything all right here?" Donovan inquired, his tone stern. Stephanie forced a polite smile. "Yes, officer, we're just starting to board. Can I help you with something?" Donovan angled his head toward Meredith. "That woman there," he began, pointing with the slightest tilt of his chin, "traveling alone?" Stephanie frowned, glancing over at Meredith. "I believe so, yes." "Is there a problem?" "I just want to be sure she's cleared to board," Donovan said in a voice that suggested a looming suspicion. "You might want to check her ticket carefully. Could be carrying something she shouldn't." Stephanie hesitated. Airport security was thorough, and the TSA would have already screened everyone's carry-ons. But the last thing she wanted to do was argue with a law enforcement officer in the middle of a busy terminal. "I can scan her boarding pass again," she said cautiously, "if that would make you feel more comfortable, officer." Donovan nodded sharply. He felt validated by the agent's acquiescence. The truth was, he had no real evidence. He was relying on an undefined hunch that frequently surfaced in his mind when he saw travelers of color who seemed to be too comfortable. Donovan rationalized it as caution, not racism, but the pattern was consistent. Stephanie made the overhead announcement for the next boarding group. Passengers lined up, rummaging for ID and boarding passes. Meredith stepped into line, calm and collected. By now, she was used to experiencing small incidents of racial bias in her life, though she had no idea how quickly this one would escalate. As she neared the podium, Stephanie spotted Donovan out of the corner of her eye and gave a tight nod. "May I see your boarding pass and ID again, please?" Stephanie asked politely. Meredith was momentarily puzzled. She'd scanned her pass just moments ago when entering the gate area. Nevertheless, she complied with a warm smile, producing her driver's license and the same boarding pass. "Of course," she said. "Is there a problem?" "Just a standard recheck," Stephanie said, trying to maintain a professional facade. She swiped the boarding pass again. The system approved it without a hitch. She handed it back. "You're all set, Ms. Cole." Then she looked at Donovan, as if to say, "Everything's clear." Donovan, however, didn't move. He wanted something more. He cleared his throat. "Actually, ma'am," he said, addressing Meredith directly, "I need a word with you." "Step aside, please." Meredith raised an eyebrow but remained composed. "Certainly," she replied. She stepped away from the boarding line with her small carry-on. The eyes of other passengers flicked toward them, some curious, some concerned. The hush that often precedes a brewing confrontation began to hover in the air. Stephanie shifted uncomfortably behind the podium, uncertain whether she should intervene or simply proceed with boarding. Meanwhile, Donovan guided Meredith to a corner near the gate windows, out of direct earshot of the crowd. Meredith met his gaze evenly. "How can I help you, officer?" The question hung between them. Donovan's jaw tightened. He still couldn't articulate any specific cause beyond a vague feeling of distrust. He resorted to a standard line. "I just want to ensure everything is in order." "You came through security alone, correct?" "Yes, I did," she replied calmly, as do countless travelers each day. Donovan's frustration flared at her composed demeanor. "Is that carry-on your only luggage?" "Yes, officer," Meredith repeated, her voice respectful but unwavering. "I'm on a short trip, so I'm packing light." Their exchange, though outwardly polite, crackled with tension. Meredith could sense what Donovan was doing, but she needed to remain undercover and keep a low profile. The last thing she wanted was a scene before she even boarded the plane she had secretly come to inspect. Yet, the glaring injustice of it all was difficult to ignore, especially for a woman who believed in creating a welcoming and fair travel experience for all passengers. Donovan motioned as if he wanted to search her bag. Meredith unzipped it without complaint, revealing neatly folded clothes, a tablet, a small toiletry bag, and some business documents that bore no company logo. Donovan flipped through the items, disappointed to find nothing incriminating. When he came across the business documents, flight timetables, operational data for Skyway Connect, he paused. "These look official," he said. Meredith nodded, tension crossing her face for the first time. "I work in the airline industry." That was all she offered. She wasn't ready to blow her cover, not yet. Donovan stared at her for a few lingering seconds. The only conclusion he could draw was that she was a lower-level airline employee, perhaps a gate agent or flight attendant, which somehow only deepened his suspicion. Why would a mere gate agent or flight attendant travel under a different airline's flight pass? It was a puzzle, and in Donovan's mind, suspicious puzzle pieces confirmed his preconceived narrative. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "All right," he said, "but I'll be watching." Meredith nodded, reclaiming her items. "Thank you, officer," she said, managing to keep her tone courteous. With that, she headed back to the boarding line, ignoring the curious stares from other passengers. As she scanned her pass at the podium, Stephanie avoided her eyes, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. She gestured for Meredith to proceed onto the jet bridge. The tension didn't leave the air, even after Meredith disappeared from sight. Donovan remained near the gate, folding his arms, determined to see this through. He had no real reason to escalate things, no, not yet, but he had a feeling. He told himself he always trusted those feelings. The morning had already begun with tension, and it was far from over. Meredith found her seat in business class, 3A, next to a window that overlooked the vast tarmac. She settled in, placing her carry-on in the overhead compartment. The seat was comfortable enough, plenty of legroom, plush upholstery. A flight attendant, Jenny Caldwell, approached to welcome her. "Good morning, miss. May I offer you a pre-flight beverage? We have orange juice or water right now." Meredith glanced around. A few other passengers in business class were already sipping drinks. Normally, she might have declined, but part of her objective was to see if the airline's courtesy and service were consistent. "Yes, I'll take some water, please," she replied with a thankful smile. Jenny nodded and returned with a small plastic cup filled with water. She placed it on Meredith's tray table and handed her a menu for in-flight meals. "Our flight time is a little over 2 hours this morning," Jenny said. "We'll have a breakfast service shortly after takeoff." Meredith thanked her. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a commotion at the plane's entrance. That same officer, Donovan Meyers, was at the cabin door, appearing to have an intense discussion with another member of the crew. One of the flight attendants frowned, clearly confused. Eventually, Donovan seemed unsatisfied but retreated. This was highly unusual. Police officers didn't typically linger at airplane entrances unless there was a concrete issue. Meredith tried to stay focused on her reason for being there. She thumbed through the in-flight magazine, occasionally glancing at her phone to check emails, though she hadn't logged onto the airport Wi-Fi under her real identity. She had a mental checklist: evaluate cabin cleanliness, staff courtesy, meal quality, and overall efficiency. She also wanted to speak with passengers, if time permitted, to gauge their experiences. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Officer Meyers. His behavior was unsettling. She knew what discrimination felt like. This wasn't the first time she had experienced it, nor would it be the last. But the blatant nature of it, in front of so many people, made her uneasy. Within minutes, the plane was fully boarded, and the door was sealed. The engines hummed softly in anticipation. A flight attendant gave the usual safety demonstration, walking the aisle to ensure seatbelts were fastened and tray tables were up. Meredith exhaled, letting the sense of calm settle in. Once they were airborne, hopefully, she could review her notes and strategize how best to address any service shortcomings back at the corporate office. For now, she just wanted to relax, or at least try. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied onto the runway, and in short order, took flight. The rising altitude pressed Meredith back into her seat. She gazed out the window, watching the ground recede and the city of Atlanta sprawl below like a miniaturized map. This feeling of taking off into the sky never got old for her. It was part of the reason she dedicated her life to aviation: the wonder, the freedom, the sense that anything was possible if you could just lift off. About 20 minutes into the flight, the captain announced that they'd reached cruising altitude. The flight attendants began the breakfast service. Jenny came by with a tray, offering a choice between an omelette and French toast. Meredith chose the omelette. She was about to open her tray table when her phone vibrated gently in her pocket. Surprised, she realized she'd forgotten to set it to airplane mode. Instinctively, she took it out to switch it off, glancing at the screen. She noticed a text message from a colleague, someone who knew about her undercover mission, saying, "Heard rumor a security officer gave you trouble. Let me know if everything's okay." Meredith typed back a quick reassurance that she was fine but would follow up after landing. She switched her phone off entirely, letting the momentary wave of anxiety pass. Instead, she refocused on the in-flight experience. She unwrapped her utensils, tasted the omelette, slightly overcooked, and made a mental note. The coffee was strong, though, which was a plus in her book. Across the aisle, a couple chatted about their connecting flight. "I just hope we don't miss our connection," the woman said worriedly. Meredith leaned over and politely asked if they'd been informed about any possible delays. They shook their heads, so she offered to inquire with the flight attendants, another chance to observe how the crew handled passenger concerns. As Meredith was finishing her breakfast, Jenny returned. "Everything okay?" she asked, directing the question to Meredith and the couple across the aisle. "Everything's fine," Meredith said, carefully choosing her words. "The omelette was just a bit dry, but otherwise good." These folks across the aisle are worried about their connecting flight. Is there any update on arrival time? Jenny nodded sympathetically. We're expecting to land on time, maybe even a few minutes early. I'll double-check with the cockpit and come back with a more precise update. Would that help? The couple smiled in relief. Meredith nodded. So far, Jenny was doing well on courtesy, attentiveness, and helpfulness, another positive mark to put in her mental checklist. Then, a flicker of memory crossed Meredith's mind, Donovan's suspicious stare, that subtle sense of being targeted. She shook it off. She was thousands of feet in the air now, presumably out of the range of any more immediate trouble from that officer. The flight continued smoothly, with some light turbulence that caused the seatbelt sign to flicker on once or twice. Otherwise, it was a routine journey. Unbeknownst to Meredith, trouble was already brewing on the ground. Donovan had spoken to the gate staff after the plane departed, fishing for more information about this mysterious passenger. When he learned she worked in the airline industry, his suspicion only deepened. She's not wearing a uniform, Donovan had insisted. Doesn't that strike you as off? The gate staff, caught off guard, politely explained that corporate employees often traveled for business out of uniform, especially if they were managers or higher. But Donovan wasn't satisfied. He left the terminal with a tense jaw and a determination to follow up with the airline's administration. He was sure he'd unearth something nefarious if he just dug deep enough. Up in the sky, Meredith remained unaware of Donovan's continued digging. She concluded her flight by chatting with a few other passengers, noting their feedback. People generally seemed happy with Skyway Connect, praising the staff's friendliness but mentioning minor complaints about meal variety, seat comfort, and occasional scheduling glitches. Meredith jotted down these mental observations, prepared to address them in the next corporate meeting. This was exactly why she did these undercover trips, to see the unfiltered truth of her airline's operations, both the good and the areas needing improvement. As the plane descended toward Chicago O'Hare, a swirl of emotion took hold of Meredith. She felt a mix of pride for the flight crew and frustration over the morning's encounter with Officer Meyers. She had no idea that their paths would cross again soon, under circumstances far more dramatic and revealing, and that the entire fiasco would result in a shocking public confrontation unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Upon landing at Chicago O'Hare, Meredith disembarked with the rest of the passengers. She offered quiet thanks to the flight attendants at the door, who smiled back, none the wiser that their CEO had been on board. She felt a pang of gratification that, despite the earlier run-in, the flight itself had been smooth and largely positive. In the terminal, she ducked into a restroom and composed herself, preparing to step back into the role of corporate executive on the move. She planned to meet with a few local managers from the airline, but under the same incognito approach. She wanted unfiltered honesty, not the curated version people often presented to the CEO. Shortly after, she booked an Uber to take her downtown, where a small conference room had been reserved under the alias Ms. Cole. She texted a few staff members, department heads, mid-level managers, asking them to come by for a brief meeting about operational updates. The staff believed they were meeting an inspector from headquarters. It was one of Meredith's tactics. When people didn't know the boss was in front of them, they tended to be more genuine about problems and their daily experiences. The meeting was productive. A ground operations manager mentioned recurring software glitches that messed with flight schedules. A customer service supervisor praised their flight attendants but complained about being understaffed during peak hours. Meredith listened intently, taking copious notes. She asked follow-up questions, probed for details. The staff members appreciated her interest, though they still didn't suspect who she really was. After all, she wore no fancy suit, flaunted no executive aura. She was simply a poised, inquisitive woman gathering information. After nearly 2 hours, she thanked them all, promising to relay their feedback to the higher-ups. The managers and supervisors left, none the wiser. Once she was alone, Meredith opened her personal phone, which was turned off for privacy reasons, and switched it on. Instantly, a flood of messages popped up. Most were mundane corporate reminders or quick questions about upcoming schedules. But one message made her pause. It was from her personal assistant, Kimberly, need to speak ASAP. Some officer called, something about an investigation. He's from Atlanta. Please advise. Meredith felt her heart rate spike. Officer Meyers. He must have looked up her name from the flight manifest or rummaged through what was accessible in the system. She clenched her jaw, a flurry of thoughts swirling in her mind. If she confronted him directly, she'd risk revealing her identity. On the other hand, ignoring it might escalate the situation further. She needed to tread carefully. She dialed Kimberly, who answered on the first ring. Kimberly, what's going on? Meredith asked. There's a man named Officer Donovan Meyers, Kimberly explained, her voice tense. He claims he's investigating potential fraudulent travel or suspicious activity tied to a passenger on your flight this morning. He somehow got directed to the corporate line. I didn't tell him anything, but he's persistent. Meredith closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. All right. Don't reveal anything for now. If he calls again, just say we need official documentation for any investigation. I'll handle it. She ended the call, her mind racing. In theory, Donovan had no grounds to pursue anything. Meredith's travel arrangements were completely legitimate. But if he kept digging, he might discover that Meredith Cole was, in fact, the CEO. The problem was that his suspicious mind, fueled by prejudice, could cause a public relations nightmare if he started making baseless accusations. And if she was forced to reveal her identity just to shut him down, she'd lose the element of surprise she used for her inspections. She decided to fly back to Atlanta that evening to handle the matter. Enough was enough. She had the data she needed from this trip, and she didn't want to let Donovan's meddling cause further complications. If he was still snooping around, she'd confront him in her office, on her own terms. She booked a flight back on a major carrier that operated an evening service to Atlanta. Let him try to question that, she thought, steeling herself. As she made her way back to O'Hare, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a local manager informing her that the next flight to Atlanta was delayed due to a mechanical issue. She changed her plans accordingly, rebooking onto a slightly later flight. She spent the next few hours in the airline lounge, scanning through emails and finalizing some proposals. It was a productive lull, though she couldn't fully relax with Donovan's looming interference on her mind. Finally, the time came to board her flight home. She felt a twinge of relief. Tonight, she'd be sleeping in her own bed, and tomorrow, she could address Donovan properly. She boarded the plane, found her seat, and prepared for takeoff. Little did she know that Donovan had been busy making phone calls back in Atlanta. Using questionable means, he obtained a partial passenger manifest from the morning flight, cross-referenced it, and discovered that Meredith Cole was associated with airline operations. That was enough to fan the flames of his baseless suspicions. He managed to get wind that she would be returning that evening. Whether he was pulling strings or simply bullying a contact to share scheduling details is unclear, but by the time Meredith's plane landed around 11 p.m. in Atlanta, Donovan was waiting. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was quieter at this late hour, but still far from deserted. Travelers waited near baggage claim, rideshare drivers hovered with their phones, and overhead announcements continued at less frequent intervals. Meredith, tired from the day, walked toward baggage claim to retrieve her small suitcase that she had to check in. Her footsteps echoed in the relatively empty corridor. That's when she saw him, Officer Donovan Meyers, leaning against a pillar, arms folded across his chest, scanning the arriving passengers. The moment he spotted Meredith, his eyes narrowed. She paused, considering whether to walk the other way, but realized it was futile. She was too exhausted to deal with cat-and-mouse games. She approached him directly. Officer Meyers, she greeted, voice calm but tight with underlying frustration. I hear you've been calling my office. He tipped his chin in acknowledgement. I have. We need to talk. You weren't very forthcoming earlier. Meredith suppressed a bitter laugh. I gave you my ID, my boarding pass. You went through my belongings. What else do you need? Donovan's jaw set. Let's just say I've got more questions about who you really are and what you were doing on that flight. A spark of anger flared in Meredith's chest. And you think that justifies harassing me? He stepped closer, voice low. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. The information I've gathered suggests there's more to you that meets the eye. According to flight records, you have some ties to Skyway Connect, that airline, and yet you show up as an ordinary passenger. Care to explain? Meredith realized the time for concealment might be over, but she refused to unravel the entire truth under intimidation. This line of questioning is out of line, she said. I've broken no laws, and you have no grounds to detain or interrogate me. If you have a complaint, file it through official channels. Donovan smirked, as though her defiance confirmed his prejudices. Why don't we take a ride to the airport security office and sort this out properly? At that moment, a couple of passing travelers paused, sensing tension. Meredith held her head high. If you insist, she said, but let me be clear, you have no authority to hold me without cause. If we go to that office, I'll be calling my lawyer. Donovan shrugged. If that's what you want. Meredith followed him through a side corridor that led to the airport security offices. The walk felt surreal, each step magnifying her mixture of fury and a sense of bizarre inevitability. Once inside, a bored-looking supervisor glanced up from a small desk. Donovan muttered something about needing a private room. They ended up in a plain interview room with fluorescent lighting and sterile walls. Meredith crossed her arms over her chest, exasperated but refusing to show fear. All right, officer, you've brought me here. Now talk. Donovan paced the small room. I learned that you're affiliated with Skyway Connect in some capacity, but your pass didn't say airline employee. You were traveling as a regular passenger. Now, why would that be? Meredith's patience snapped. Let's cut the charade. I was traveling undercover to check on my airline's operations. You want to know the truth? I am the CEO of Skyway Connect, and I fly incognito to ensure that all passengers, regardless of background, get the service they deserve. The room fell silent. Donovan froze, eyes wide with disbelief, and then burst out in a half-laugh, half-scoff. CEO? That's rich, he sneered. You really expect me to believe that you're some high-powered executive, traveling around like this? He gestured dismissively at her unassuming attire. Meredith locked eyes with him, her calmness reasserting itself. Yes, I do, because it's the truth. Now, if you want proof, here. She took out her phone, tapping through a digital folder that contained corporate documentation. She opened a file displaying an official contract of employment from Skyway Connect, complete with her signature and the corporate seal. She turned the screen toward him. Donovan's face clouded over in confusion. He glanced at the document, uncertain whether it was genuine. This could be a forgery, he muttered, but his confidence wavered. Meredith sighed. Call the main office. Ask for Kimberly Reed, my personal assistant. She'll confirm everything. But be prepared to answer why you've been harassing the CEO of an airline with no legitimate grounds. Donovan faltered for a moment, his prejudice and suspicion warring with the dawning possibility that he might be in serious trouble. Still, he clung to the last shreds of his bias. People can fake anything these days, he growled. You can't blame me for being cautious. You don't exactly look like, Meredith's eyes blazed. Like what, officer? Like a CEO? Or is it that I don't look like how you think a CEO should look because I'm a black woman? He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. Your racism is obvious, she continued, her voice steady but laced with anger. You singled me out for no reason at the gate, then doubled down on your unfounded suspicions. You're abusing your authority to perpetuate your bias. I've done absolutely nothing illegal. A ripple of tension spread through Donovan's stance. He tried to regain the upper hand. Don't throw around accusations like that. I'm just doing my job. Meredith leaned forward, placing her hands on the table between them. Your job is to protect and serve, not harass and demean. Let's call my lawyer, or better yet, let's call my entire corporate communications team. By the time I'm done, there will be no doubt about who I am and how you acted without justification. As the words left her mouth, the door to the small office opened, and the security supervisor from earlier stepped in, brow furrowed. What's going on here? He demanded, looking from Donovan to Meredith. He glanced at the document on Meredith's phone screen, recognized the official tone, and his eyes widened. "Officer Meyers, you better have a good reason for this. I just got a call from the front desk. Ms. Reed from Skyway Connect is on the line. She says Ms. Cole is their CEO." Donovan blanched. It was as if the final pillar of his doubt came crashing down. He stared at Meredith, swallowing hard. The notion that he had cornered a powerful executive, someone with the resources and public platform to expose him, finally registered. He stammered, stepping back from the table. Meredith squared her shoulders, turning to the supervisor. "Yes, let's go ahead and finalize this." She took her phone back. "I'll be calling legal counsel. You'll be hearing from my office, and we'll see how the airport administration handles a racist officer who unlawfully detains a CEO for looking suspicious." The supervisor shot Donovan a sharp glare. "Officer Meyers, you need to leave the room. Now." Donovan hesitated, fists clenched, but he had no choice. He stormed out without another word. The supervisor turned to Meredith, apologetic. "Ms. Cole, I'm sorry for this incident. I had no idea." Meredith cut him off gently. "Your apology is noted, but this is bigger than me. He targeted me because of the color of my skin. No one deserves that. I will be following up. Now, am I free to go?" The supervisor nodded, looking distraught. "Yes, of course." Meredith gathered her things, her heart pounding. She stepped out into the hallway, the air cooler and her mind aflame with a swirl of anger, relief, and renewed determination. That night, she drove home in near silence, replaying the confrontation in her mind, Donovan's face, his sneering skepticism, his blatant discrimination. She thought about how often people of color faced exactly this treatment daily, without the advantage of being a CEO who could stand up and reveal a powerful truth. Unbeknownst to Meredith, the story was far from over. By the time she reached home, a news tip had already trickled out through an airport staff member who overheard fragments of conversation. The rumor was that a racist cop had detained a black woman, only to discover she was the CEO of the airline. Phones were buzzing, emails were flying, and social media was about to erupt in outrage. The karmic wave was beginning to build, and Officer Donovan Meyers was standing right in its path. Early the next morning, Meredith woke to an onslaught of notifications. Her phone vibrated incessantly, text messages from friends, colleagues, even family members, all sending links to a viral news story. Local Atlanta news outlets had run with the headline, "Local cop allegedly harasses airline CEO at Hartsfield-Jackson." Though the article didn't name Donovan yet, only referencing an unnamed officer, it was enough to set off a flurry of social media commentary, some supportive, some enraged, some disbelieving. Meredith groaned. She had hoped to handle the situation more discreetly, but now it was out in the open. She scrolled through her phone, reading statements from people outraged by what had happened. A tweet from a local civil rights activist demanded the officer be fired. Another tweet from a well-known journalist called for a deeper inquiry into systemic bias at the airport. Influencers and everyday citizens alike were chiming in, turning the entire incident into a national conversation. Meanwhile, at the Atlanta Police Department's airport division, Donovan's day began badly. He walked into the briefing room and found people whispering, glancing nervously in his direction. His commanding officer, Captain Roland Reyes, summoned him into the office with a stony expression. On the desk, a printout of the story lay spread open. "Officer Meyers," Captain Reyes said, voice dripping with disappointment, "we have a problem. A very big problem." Donovan's cheeks burned as he surveyed the headline. "Look, sir, it's not as bad as it sounds." You were just what, exactly?" Reyes interrupted. "According to the complaint filed by Ms. Meredith Cole, who happens to be one of the top executives in the aviation business, you detained her without probable cause, harassed her based on her appearance, and refused to release her until a supervisor intervened." Donovan struggled to maintain composure. "She was acting suspicious. I had a tip about possible contraband." Reyes slammed a hand on his desk. "A tip that never materialized into any evidence. You singled her out, rummaged through her belongings, and then still tracked her down on her return flight again, without proof. This has all the markings of racial profiling, Myers. It makes the department look terrible. Donovan clenched his jaw. Sir, you know I've got a strong record. Reyes shook his head. Your record isn't spotless. We've had complaints in the past, but they were never substantiated enough for disciplinary action. Now, the mayor's office is calling me, demanding an explanation. Do you understand how serious this is? Donovan remained silent, anger and fear clashing in his mind. The truth was, he'd never expected any real pushback because so many incidents in the past had been swept under the rug. But detaining a high-profile CEO changed everything. Reyes folded his arms, exhaling sharply. I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation. Hand over your badge and your gun. Stunned, Donovan reached down to unclip his badge. But, sir, no arguments, Reyes snapped. And if Ms. Cole decides to press charges, we might be looking at a lawsuit. Get out of my office. Donovan left, his dignity in shreds, grappling with the realization that karma had arrived in full force. But it was about to get even more intense as the story continued to spread, magnified by the unstoppable power of the internet. Meanwhile, Meredith was on a conference call with her company's legal and PR teams. A media frenzy had erupted, with journalists calling for statements. Activists were demanding to interview Meredith, praising her for exposing the officer's racist profiling. Internally, her board members were concerned about how this sudden spotlight might affect the airline's reputation, even though Meredith was the victim. Meredith listened, weary yet resolute. We should release a statement about the incident, she told her PR manager, Darius. I want to focus on the larger issue of discrimination in air travel and law enforcement. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who faces this. Darius agreed. But also, Ms. Cole, the media is specifically requesting your personal account. They want to hear you speak. Our social channels are blowing up. Schedule a press conference, Meredith decided. I'll address it directly. That way, we can control the narrative rather than let rumors spiral. Within hours, the press conference was set for that afternoon in a large conference room near the main terminal, with the Atlanta skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Cameras were positioned in neat rows, journalists with notepads and microphones waited impatiently, and a few members of the public managed to slip in. The room buzzed with anticipation. Stories had circulated online that the officer had forcibly pulled Meredith out of line, hurled slurs, some details were exaggerated, others underreported. Everyone was eager for clarity. Meredith stepped to the podium, dressed in a simple navy blue blazer, her demeanor calm yet steely. The flashes of cameras lit up her face. She thanked everyone for coming, took a breath, and began. Good afternoon. My name is Meredith Cole, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Skyway Connect. I stand here today to address an incident of unlawful detention and harassment that I experienced at this very airport 2 nights ago. She paused, scanning the room. An officer singled me out, searched my personal belongings, questioned my identity, and refused to accept my valid credentials until a supervisor intervened. The officer's actions were not only baseless but were fueled by racial profiling. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Meredith cleared her throat. Although I am fortunate to have the resources and platform to fight back, many travelers, especially those who are black or belong to other marginalized groups, do not. This incident shines a spotlight on a broader systemic issue. It is my hope that by sharing my story, we can spur constructive dialogue and policy changes that ensure everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of race or background. A reporter from a local TV station piped up. Ms. Cole, have you decided whether to file a lawsuit against the officer or the police department? Meredith pressed her lips together. My team is reviewing all legal avenues. Our goal is not financial gain but accountability. We want to ensure this behavior does not go unchecked or unpunished. Another reporter shouted, how do you plan to address your own airline staff about this? Are you afraid it might damage your corporate relationships with law enforcement? Meredith shook her head. Skyway Connect values safety and respects law enforcement. We partner with security agencies across our network. However, we cannot and will not condone unlawful harassment. This isn't about harming relationships, it's about demanding integrity. We stand by the principles of equality and fairness. A volley of other questions came, some more pointed than others, but Meredith answered each one calmly. She wrapped up the press conference by saying, "I encourage everyone to speak out when they see injustice. It may be uncomfortable, but silence only perpetuates wrongdoing." Thank you. The applause that followed felt somber yet supportive. Within minutes, news outlets broadcasted her statement nationwide. Social media erupted again with trending hashtags calling for Donovan's dismissal. People praised Meredith's poise, her call for systemic change, and her refusal to remain silent. Don't miss what happens next. Stay with Adam Alpha for the unfolding drama. Across town, Donovan sat in his modest apartment, eyes locked on the television screen covering the press conference. The moment he heard Meredith say racial profiling, he felt a lump in his throat. Panic flared in him as cameras panned to protesters outside the airport, holding signs that read "End racial profiling now" and "Justice for all passengers." He recognized a few faces, fellow officers from the department, watching him with condemnation. He switched channels, only to see more of the same coverage. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages, some from old friends, outraged by his actions, others from people mocking or threatening him. He was effectively a pariah. The department had placed him on administrative leave, but the internal investigation was almost certainly heading toward termination. His own union representative warned that they might not be able to protect him if the evidence of racial bias was conclusive. Donovan tried to rationalize his actions, but each time he replayed the incident in his head, he knew that if the passenger had been a white man in a suit, he likely wouldn't have given a second glance. He was guilty, whether he could admit that to himself or not. The reality was that the tide of public and institutional opinion had turned decisively against him. He flicked off the TV, grabbed his car keys, and decided to drive aimlessly, his mind thick with regret, denial, and a strange anger at the entire situation, as if it were something that happened to him rather than the direct result of his own choices. But deep down, a voice kept telling him, "You did this. You singled her out. Now you're paying the price." A week later, a disciplinary hearing took place at the Atlanta Police Department's downtown headquarters. Donovan sat at a long table opposite a panel of officials, including Captain Reyes, an internal affairs officer, and a city attorney. Meredith, flanked by her legal counsel, appeared via video conference. She chose not to attend in person, believing her presence might overshadow the objective process. After formalities, the city attorney began by presenting the evidence: Donovan's track record of questionable stops, multiple informal complaints that never progressed due to lack of evidence, and the testimony of Meredith Cole and the security supervisor who had witnessed Donovan's conduct in the airport security office. The supervisor recounted how Donovan refused to release Meredith despite no tangible reason to hold her. When Donovan had the chance to speak, he tried to muster a defense. "I received intel about a suspicious passenger," he insisted. "I was just following up on that lead." The city attorney frowned. "Officer Meyers, can you produce any record of this intel? Who gave you the tip?" Donovan's face reddened. "It was an anonymous source," he mumbled. The attorney pressed, "You have no record of this call or source, no official report filed, and no supportive evidence. Is that correct?" Donovan opened and closed his mouth, then finally sighed. "Yes," he admitted quietly. Captain Reyes then asked, "How do you explain detaining Ms. Cole after you had already searched her belongings and found nothing suspicious?" Donovan felt sweat trickling down the back of his neck. She was too calm. It felt off to me." A hush fell over the room. The panel exchanged disbelieving glances. The city attorney turned to the video screen. "Ms. Cole, do you have anything to add?" Meredith's image appeared steady, poised. "Yes. The entire situation was predicated on Officer Meyers' biased assumption that I didn't belong in the airline's business class or that I was somehow suspicious because I was a confident black woman traveling alone. This was not merely a lapse in judgment, it was targeted discrimination. I hope the department will take appropriate action and address the systemic issues that allow such officers to act with impunity." Her words resonated in the silent chamber. Donovan looked down at his hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The hearing concluded in under an hour. The panel deliberated briefly and then announced their decision. Donovan Meyers was to be terminated from the force, effective immediately. Furthermore, the Atlanta Police Department would open a broader inquiry into their training programs to prevent future incidents of racial profiling. Donovan's shoulders slumped. He felt numb as he walked out of the hearing room. Reporters clamored for a statement, but he said nothing, hustling to his car. Within hours, the media reported that the officer at the center of the scandal had been fired. Public response was swift, a mix of relief, vindication, and calls for deeper reforms. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new normal. Donovan was out of a job, facing condemnation not just from the public but from his family, who didn't share his racist beliefs. He found it impossible to secure new employment in law enforcement. Word had spread, and no department wanted the baggage of hiring a cop fired for racial profiling. Legal actions were also in motion. Though Meredith didn't personally pursue massive damages, civil rights groups pressured the city to hold Donovan accountable, including potential lawsuits for harassment and mental anguish. When reporters cornered Donovan outside his apartment, he tried to appear remorseful, but the damage was done. Any apology he offered came off as too little, too late. He would forever be labeled the cop who let his prejudice sabotage his career. Meanwhile, Meredith decided to channel the energy of this ordeal into something positive. She increased corporate funding for bias training among Skyway Connect employees and launched a new passenger advocacy program aimed at protecting travelers from discrimination. She also partnered with local nonprofits to hold workshops at various airports, educating staff on recognizing and confronting implicit bias. One morning, as Meredith was reviewing final details for a major training initiative, her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant, Kimberly, read, "We're trending positively. Public sees you as a champion for equality in travel. Good job, boss." A small smile curved across Meredith's lips. This was never how she wanted to find herself in the national spotlight, but if the incident helped thousands of other travelers feel safer and more respected, it would be worth it. In a final twist of fate, an internal investigation revealed that Donovan had been forging some of his so-called tips and exaggerating others to justify random searches, primarily of black and brown travelers. His entire history came under scrutiny. Additional lawsuits were filed by people who realized they'd been similarly profiled. Donovan found himself inundated with legal fees, forced to sell his car and eventually his home. The same prejudice that had emboldened him for years was now the very force destroying his life. This was the hard karma that had been waiting for him, his downfall directly proportional to the pain he'd inflicted on others. Weeks bled into months, and the media interest slowly waned, replaced by the next big headlines. The scandal remained an inflection point, however. Several other airports across the country took note, implementing stricter guidelines on how officers engaged with passengers. Skyway Connect reported a renewed surge of goodwill from customers who appreciated Meredith's transparency and advocacy. Meredith herself continued traveling, occasionally incognito, though her anonymity had been compromised by the viral news story. She adapted by adding subtle changes to her approach, traveling under different routes and times. Still, her mission remained unwavering. She wanted to see firsthand that her airline was living up to its promise of treating every passenger with dignity and respect. On one such flight, a young black woman hesitated at the gate, fumbling with her boarding pass, visibly nervous. Meredith gently asked if everything was all right. The woman glanced at Meredith and recognized her face from a viral news clip. She lit up with relief. "You're Ms. Cole. Thank you for what you did. It means a lot to people like me." A warmth spread through Meredith. She ushered the woman toward the gate agent, who resolved the boarding pass issue with ease. They parted ways on the jet bridge. As Meredith settled into her seat, she realized that despite the challenges, the controversies, and the sometimes heartbreaking realities of racial bias, the fight was worth it. Every step of progress made travel and life a little fairer, a little kinder. When the plane lifted off, she gazed out the window at the receding ground. She thought of the arcs of fate that had brought Officer Meyers to his reckoning and her to her role as an advocate for change. She hoped that one day, stories like hers would no longer be necessary. But until then, she would remain vigilant, ready to shine a light on discrimination wherever it appeared. After all, she believed in flight, the possibility of rising above limitations, above fear, and above prejudice, soaring into a future where equality wasn't just a dream but a collective reality. And so ends the gripping tale of a woman wronged by prejudice, only to rise as a beacon of hope in exposing the injustice at Hartsfield-Jackson. Meredith Cole reminded the world that power isn't just about status, it's about using your voice to create a better, fairer society. Officer Meyers learned that unchecked bias eventually catches up, that karma has a way of delivering justice where it's deserved most. It's a reminder that every act, no matter how small, can have huge repercussions, good or bad. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about how we treat each other in places as everyday as an airport gate, then don't let the message end here. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Adam Alpha for more stories that shine a light on the triumph of integrity over injustice. Together, let's keep pushing for kindness, fairness, and unity, one story at a time.